Discover the story behind the fall of the Soviet Union in this gripping article. Learn about the role of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, two of the most influential leaders of the 20th century, and their efforts to challenge Soviet influence and bring about the downfall of the evil empire. From economic turmoil to political unrest, this article delves into the factors that led to the collapse of the Soviet Union and explores the pivotal roles played by Thatcher and Reagan in this historic event. The fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 was a monumental event that changed the course of history. For decades, the USSR had been a global superpower, with a powerful military, vast territory, and a communist government that controlled every aspect of its citizens' lives. But by the late 1980s, the Soviet economy was in shambles, the people were disillusioned, and the government was losing control. The collapse of the Soviet Union was not a sudden event, but rather the result of years of economic, political, and social turmoil. This article will explore the factors that led to the collapse of the Soviet Union and the role of the United States, United Kingdom, and other Western countries, as well as the pivotal roles of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher in bringing about the downfall of the evil empire. The Soviet Union was founded in 1922 after the Bolshevik Revolution, and over the years, it had grown into a formidable world power. However, by the 1980s, the Soviet economy was in dire straits. The centrally planned economy was inefficient and ineffective, and the Soviet government was spending huge amounts of money on its military and space programs. At the same time, the price of oil, a major export for the Soviet Union, was plummeting. The combination of these factors led to an economic crisis that the Soviet government was unable to manage. The situation was made worse by the policies of Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, who came to power in 1985. Gorbachev introduced reforms aimed at modernizing the Soviet economy and making it more efficient, but these policies were slow to take effect. In addition, Gorbachev's policies of glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, led to greater political freedom and the spread of information, which ultimately eroded the government's control over society. These changes led to growing unrest among the people and a loss of faith in the government. The United States, under the leadership of President Ronald Reagan, saw an opportunity to take advantage of the Soviet Union's weaknesses. Reagan was a fierce opponent of communism and believed that the United States needed to confront the Soviet Union directly. He launched a military buildup that included the development of new weapons systems and an aggressive foreign policy that challenged Soviet influence around the world. At the same time, Reagan engaged in a diplomatic offensive aimed at isolating the Soviet Union and supporting anti-communist movements around the world. This included providing support to the Afghan resistance fighting Soviet forces in Afghanistan, as well as supporting anti-communist movements in Nicaragua and other countries. Reagan's efforts were successful in weakening the Soviet Union and reducing its global influence. Another key figure in the collapse of the Soviet Union was British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Like Reagan, Thatcher was a fierce opponent of communism and believed in a strong, capitalist economy. She worked closely with Reagan to confront the Soviet Union, and her policies of privatization and deregulation served as a model for the economic reforms that Gorbachev would eventually introduce. Thatcher was also a key player in the negotiations that led to the end of the Cold War. In 1989, she met with Gorbachev to discuss arms control and other issues, and the two leaders developed a close relationship. Thatcher's support for Gorbachev's reforms and her willingness to engage with the Soviet Union helped to build trust between the two countries and paved the way for a peaceful resolution to the Cold War. The collapse of the Soviet Union was not without its difficulties. The transition to a market economy was painful, and many people lost their jobs and their savings. There was also political instability as new governments took over in the former Soviet republics. However, the collapse of the Soviet Union ultimately led to greater freedom and democracy in the former Soviet states, and the end of the Cold War marked a turning point in world history. The role of oil prices in the collapse of the Soviet Union cannot be ignored. The Soviet Union was heavily dependent on oil exports, and the decline in oil prices in the 1980s put significant strain on the Soviet economy. With the price of oil falling, the Soviet Union was unable to generate enough revenue to keep up with its military spending and maintain the standard of living for its citizens. This contributed to the economic crisis that ultimately led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. In conclusion, the collapse of the Soviet Union was the result of a combination of factors, including economic and political instability, growing unrest among the people, and the efforts of Western countries, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom, to challenge Soviet influence. Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher played pivotal roles in bringing about the downfall of the evil empire, through their aggressive foreign policies and diplomatic efforts to engage with Soviet leaders. The collapse of the Soviet Union was not without its challenges, but it ultimately led to greater freedom and democracy in the former Soviet states, and marked a significant turning point in world history.